So welcome again, month's Demystifying the Microsoft Cloud. I'm Mark Sherry, your host. We have another great topic for you today, along with another new special guest on the show. What will we be discussing? Well, as you already know, we're going to teach you how to control your costs in Microsoft Azure. And who's our new guest? None other than the great Richard Broida. He is the man behind the curtain, or rather in this case, behind the cloud. So Richard, thank you so much for joining us. By way of introduction, it'd only be appropriate if I showed you a picture of Richard heavily entrenched in his Azure work.
That's me, all right.
Let's see what's going on with this. There he is. This is real live footage of Mr. Broida working in Azure.
I actually look better than that, but oh well.
A ton better, might I add. So there he is, our mad scientist, Richard Broida. Today, Richard will be showing you the latest services and tools to equip you to maximize your investment in Azure. And the goal of this webinar is to help you develop a strong governance plan to control your Azure costs. And as always, Bennett Adelson is here to help you in your journey as an experienced Microsoft solution partner with various certifications and awards. So let's start off with a quick poll here, folks. Okay. So just to get a sense of where everyone is at in their Azure journey, when you see the questions pop up on the screen, just go ahead and vote. And that will indicate, that should show up. I've set it to where everyone can vote and see the responses. All right, a lot of people are somewhat comfortable, looking good. Okay, so I think that is going to be the consensus. So most of our attendees are somewhat comfortable. Okay, now what is your experience with Azure? All the way from I'm just now looking into Azure down to, hey, I've plunged myself entirely into Azure and have been loving it and using it for a long time. All right. So it's actually an even spread across the board. Third, are you using Office 365? And if not, do you plan to? All right, everyone's an O365 user. Excellent. And our last question, do you have an Azure governance plan? All the way get this airtight down to no, but I'm open to one. All right. Okay, so this is the perfect audience for this webcast. Okay, thank you so much for participating. This is going to help us know how to understand who we're presenting to. And this presentation is going to be great for our audience because it targets two types of people. Those who have just dipped their toes into Azure and those who have plunged their entire bodies into it. So those who know it well and those who may have very little knowledge and experience. Which one are you? So I think we have a good sense of that. Maybe you've taken the first bite out of Azure and you're finding it's a wonderful and fascinating platform, and you've seen the value and ease to your company, but still both groups find that Azure is this mysterious, wrapped in an ethereal cloak, shrouded in smoke and dark clouds technology. So we want to clear up some misconceptions and questions that folks have. So let's start with just a very brief story. I ran into both of these types of customers during my time at Microsoft. Some newbie customers to Azure would start and ultimately provide promiscuously unrestricted Azure access to anyone and everyone in their organization. So things would be going great at first until the business started to get the bill. Some were so drastically over budget, and not everyone with Azure access cared about the bill. They would just spin up a VM and go without regard to it. Other customers really struggled with how much the services would be and how to figure out and what's the most effective way to use Azure. They wanted to know, how do I get a total cost of ownership understanding? So the root cause of these examples is bad governance practices. Some didn't control the access, while others didn't understand the best way to use Azure and how to do it, how to have governance. So a helpful analogy that's helpful to me is, think you're building your own house and you've hired several contractors to help. You haven't planned well or defined parameters for them, and the next thing you know, they've purchased gold, platinum, and diamonds as their materials to make your entire house. You go way over budget with that. So there needs to be a governance in place for who does what, with what, and how. So here's our agenda for today. After this webinar, you should be able to better understand how your Azure subscription pricing works, how you can estimate and compare costs of various Azure resources, how to audit your cost history, how to control costs by managing roles and policies. So at this point, I'm going to give the control to Richard, and he's going to show you an overview of Azure's governance tools. At the end of each of the 4 sections, you'll have an opportunity to ask Richard questions. So I'll be monitoring the IMs if you prefer to type your questions, or at the end, just feel free to unmute. So take it right away, Mr. Broida.
Okay, I am, you probably see a little black on your in the conference right now because I'm switching over to my desktop, where I'm hopefully going to pick up right where I was. Okay, so everybody should see the agenda slide now again. Mark, do you see it?
Yes, I see it.
All right. Is there if there's anyone who cannot hear me, let Mark know. And Mark will let me know, I think. All right. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming in. We're going to talk about cost control. Now, this is one of the major themes within the concept of Azure governance, or how do I control at a macro level what my company or my organization is doing in Azure. And we're just going to focus today on how much does it cost. We're not going to focus much on, am I getting any value out of it? We're going to assume that you are, or at least you intend to. But monitoring and predicting costs is an important ability to have, and just how thoroughly you need to do that and how comprehensive and strict about it you need to be is going to depend on your situation, and we'll talk about different alternatives and different scenarios you might face. The next part, the latter 2 topics, have to do with ways that you can proactively limit the risk of incurring costs that you didn't expect. That's mainly what it's meant for, as well as ways to help you understand better where the costs that you've already incurred have come from, and determine whether those costs were planned or not, or whether they're justified or not. Okay. Before we go too much further into any of this, though, we're also going to begin by talking a little bit about, where do Azure subscriptions come from? How do you get one, and how do you pay for them? A lot of that discussion is going to be just background, so because the other topics won't make a lot of sense unless you understand what an Azure subscription is and what different roles and responsibilities there are for controlling it. All right, this is a slide from some of Microsoft's literature that gives you sort of a bird's eye view of the tools and technologies we're going to be talking about. Most of them anyway. We're not going to talk much about Azure Security Center. It's a huge topic and very, very important, but it's outside of scope for today. We'll talk a little bit about Azure automation, but every other topic you see on here, resource tags, resource locks, resource groups, there's that word resource over and over, role-based access controls, and policies and auditing policies, and naming standards. We'll talk about all that. Okay. So the first topic is organizing your accounts and subscriptions and deciding who's going to pay for them. Okay, so we're going to talk about the theme of setting your accounts and subscriptions up so that they reflect the needs of your organization. That's a basic requirement before you can start worrying about how much things cost. we'll talk about different ways you can set these up and how you should set them up. So let's go right into that topic. You get an Azure subscription by either, there's several different ways, and different kinds of subscription arrangements are possible, and depending on which kind of arrangement you get, that'll determine how you pay for it. The simplest way is the pay-as-you-go. This is what most people are familiar with. If you've ever just gone to the Azure homepage and it said, hey, sign up free, get started now, start here, and it invites you to create an Azure account and an Azure subscription, and you fill in your information and you give the credit card number, and you have an Azure subscription. Many of you have MSDN subscription benefits. I do. Everybody at Bennett Adelson does, and so do many other organizations. If you have one, you know that you get $150 a month of free credit. So an MSDN subscription is an example of a monetary credit. So in the pay-as-you-go model, there is no monetary credit. You don't prepay for anything. You pay as you go. You can, however, prepay, and there are several different ways you can prepay for Azure services. If you do that, you haven't actually purchased a service. You've just given Microsoft money and said, give me credit for this much money against services. Why would you do that? Because Microsoft will reduce the rates. If you stick with pay-as-you-go subscription, you're going to pay the highest possible rates for the most part, or as we might say, full retail for any and all resources you buy and use in Azure. With a monetary credit, you often get a discount along with that as your incentive to go and prepay for services. You can also get what's called a monetary commitment, which is slightly different. In a monetary commitment, you get a reduced rate. Microsoft will promise to reduce your rate, but only if you consume a certain amount or more. If you don't go over that amount, then you'll still get the services you consume, but you won't pay the reduced rate. So it's if you use so much, you get a discount. You know, buy 10 and save, that kind of thing. Both these arrangements can exist at the same time. So you can have a deal where you prepay, you get some credit, and then you get a discounted rate. The canonical example of that kind of an arrangement is the last alternative, the enterprise agreement. So if Microsoft would love it if you would sign up for an enterprise agreement, and some of you probably already have, or you may have gotten it included as, you know, Azure credits included as part of an overall all-inclusive company Microsoft enterprise agreement. But in any event, an enterprise agreement typically has a prepaid monetary credit involved as well as a guaranteed discount. Usually that discount applies to all the stuff you consume in Azure, no matter what whether you go over a limit or not. Okay, so the key things to understand are, when you're talking about how much something costs in Azure, the first thing you got to figure out is it a consumption-based pricing model, meaning I pay nothing if I use nothing, and I pay usually full retail if I for whatever I do consume. That's a consumption model. Or is it going to be some kind of a prepaid model with or without a discount? Usually there's a discount arrangement included. Okay. And your MSDN subscription benefit is a monetary credit type of benefit. I don't believe it comes with any discount, though. Okay. One other thing to say about this is that, as many of you know, as all of you probably know, if you have an MSDN subscription benefit, there's a spending limit. The spending limit typically is $150 a month. Sometimes it's $200 a month. If you go over that limit, the subscription, and that's $150 a month per subscription. If you go over that limit, the entire subscription gets suspended, which is a pretty harsh remedy. So you don't want anything that you actually might want to use for real to be in a subscription that has a spending limit, i.e. don't use MSDN subscriptions for stuff that's going to run in production. Okay, so those are the pricing models. We then need to look at account. The title for this topic is account provisioning. What I'm really showing you here is just where does an Azure subscription fit in the organization of Azure accounts and Azure responsibilities. Now, if you have an Azure Enterprise Agreement, then you have or could have every single tier in this 6-tier diagram that I'm showing you. And actually, let's start at the bottom. An Azure resource is anything at all that you pay for in Azure. or anything that charges, anything that Azure meters, anything that, if Azure meters your consumption, then we will call it a resource. So virtual machines, virtual networks, web apps, websites, cloud services, storage, Azure Storage, Azure Message Bus, all these different things you can acquire and use in Azure. They're all considered resources, and they're yours once you consume them. If you don't use any resources in Azure, then you won't have to pay for anything in Azure. Whatever resources you do use, that's what you pay for. Now, resource groups are a way of organizing resources. I hope everyone on this conversation already understands what resource groups are. They are optional, but it's becoming increasingly less optional. And I'll explain as we go through the presentation why resource groups help you control costs. Resources and resource groups, if you have them, are all located within a subscription. The subscription is the unit of billing. The bill is sent for the subscription. Every bill, no matter who gets it, is going to itemize the costs by subscription. So there must be at least one subscription. Well, every resource needs to belong to one and only one subscription. And then all the resources in that subscription get added up, and that's the bill for that subscription. One step above subscription is the account. Everybody has one of those too, although many people don't know it. Because if you just go and sign up for a free, sign up for a 90-day trial and then turn it into a permanent pay-as-you-go account, it will never tell you that it's setting up an account, or at least not going to draw your attention to that. But you are, in fact, going to be creating one. If there's only one subscription, then it doesn't really matter whether you think of the account being something separate or not. But it is possible for an account to have more than one subscription. And it often is, it's fairly common in many organizations of many different sizes to put multiple subscriptions underneath each account, or underneath one account, or they may have more than one account. So everything up to here, the 1, 2, 3, 4, the 4 bottom tiers here are available to every Azure customer. The top 2, departments, and above that Azure Enterprise, that's only if you have an enterprise agreement. If you have an enterprise agreement, then the chief admin of the whole setup is going to be the enterprise administrator. And there'll be just one bill sent to the enterprise administrator, which will cover all the subscriptions in all the accounts in all the departments that roll up to that enterprise agreement. So there's generally one bill sent to whichever rung of these tiers is the highest one you have. And if you just have one account, one subscription, then you'll get one bill sent to the account owner. Okay. Most of you probably, many of you probably, if you have an Azure account set up already, I hope what I just said makes sense to you. All right, and then this lists the things that administrators and owners get to do at different levels, and this is again assuming a full-blown enterprise agreement. So on the left-hand side, we get to see what happens if you're an enterprise admin. Below that, what happens if you're a department admin, and what happens if you're an account owner, and so on. I believe all these privileges that account owners have apply regardless of whether you have an enterprise agreement or not. And same thing with service admin. Okay. So you can have multiple, if you have an enterprise agreement, you can have multiple departments, and each department can have multiple accounts. Everybody can have multiple accounts, and everybody can have multiple subscriptions within an account, and then multiple resource groups and so on. So how do you do it? Well, Microsoft points out that there are 3 basic ways you can organize your subscription hierarchy. You can do it by department, you can do it by business function, or you can do it by geography. So you might have a human resources department, and you might have a sales department, and you might have a production department, or a manufacturing department, let's say, and you want each department to have its own Azure subscription. That way each department gets its own bill. Whoever's in charge of managing that department, will see that bill, but there'll be an account administrator over all of it, and that person ultimately sees what all the departments are doing. Or you could do it by business function. You could say, for instance, that, I don't know, QA testing is a business function that multiple departments have, and we want all the assets that that are of concern to QA people going into their own subscription. Okay, so you might do it that way. Well, you can go by geography. You could have USA and Canada and Europe, or you could have Eastern U.S. and Western U.S., or Northern Ohio and Central Ohio, whatever makes sense in terms of how your business is organized. It's really up to you and your organization. The key thing is who's benefiting from this stuff we're putting up in Azure, who's paying for it, and who gets to decide what people can do with it. Okay, those three questions should be answered throughout your entire organization. Parts of the organization that don't have any interest in Azure can be left out for now, but you should think in terms of what's the entire business going to do down the road, not just what somebody might be interested in doing right now. Once you've figured out what your hierarchy would look like, then you can implement it entirely with subscriptions, and this used to be the only way you could do it before there were resource groups. Now you have the options of using resource groups and tags, so that instead of creating multiple, you could put dev and QA and staging and production all in one subscription, but you could separate them from each other by putting them in different resource groups. Or you could put human resources and you could put sales and you could put manufacturing all in one subscription, but you separate their stuff by putting them in different resource groups. If you put things in different resource groups within one subscription, then there's still going to be only one bill, and ultimately there's going to be only one party in your organization who's responsible for paying that bill. But you can still get better visibility into which resources used what, or how much consumption came from each individual resource group. And within that resource group, you can drill down and see how much came from each individual resource. And you can also use tags as part of your query to determine, again, you could assign tags to identify what a particular resource was used for. All right. Here's a graphical illustration. I won't spend a lot of time on this. It's kind of wordy, but this is just giving you hypothetical examples of how, and again, this is with a full enterprise agreement, how you could separate, how you could divide things up and at each tier level. So there's, in an enterprise agreement, there's only one enterprise enrollment, and then you can have some, you can divide up your departments by functional, business unit, or geography, and within there you can have accounts, and within there you can have subscriptions. Okay. So resource groups. This slide's a little bit awkward. If anyone here is not familiar with Azure Resource Groups, let us know, and we'll offer to talk to you about it. Most people should be familiar with the concept by now and should be actively using it. And I run into many customers who are indeed using resource groups. There's a bunch of really good reasons why you should use resource groups. But one of the chief ones is you can see in whatever way you go about looking at your costs, you can see them combined by resource group. You can segregate the permissions of people to create resources based on the resource groups. And that's the key thing we'll look at in a minute. All right, Azure tags. Let me show you real quickly what an Azure tag looks like in case you haven't done one lately. All right, so here is my MSDN Azure subscription, such as it is. Here are the resource groups within my Azure subscription. Here's one called Black Box Resource Group, and here's a resource in here called My Black Box, which is a web application. Okay, so I'm just bringing up the basic view of my web application here in the Azure portal. And right here, I can click on Tags, and I can give it a tag. And I can say the name of my tag is Department, and I'll type in Human Resources. Okay, so I've now just declared here with this tag that this single resource belongs to or has the property of being having its department assigned as Human Resources. So it's just a name value pair. You can have, I think it's 15. You have up to 15 different tags on any and all different Azure resources. And then you'll see in a minute when we look at costs, you can query based on this. Okay? The trouble with tags is that it's strictly gentleman's agreement. There are only limited abilities to force people to put tags on things, and no ability really to force people to put correct tags on things. So it's handy when you don't have anything else, but it's not the strictest way to segregate assets. Yeah, 15 tags per resource. The nice thing about tags is that they can cross multiple subscriptions and multiple resource groups. All right. So the basics about how we organize the cost structure, that's what we've covered. Now we're going to talk about how do I figure out what things are going to cost and what are they costing. So let's talk first about estimating Azure costs, predicting Azure costs. Whether you're already using Azure or whether you're expecting to, you probably want to be able to predict costs. There is a tool you can use, and many of you, I'm sure, have seen this tool called the Azure Pricing Calculator. And here it is. Okay, so this is you don't have to log into this. You don't have to have an account or anything. Anybody can just walk up to this web page and start calculating prices for things. Here on the left are just about all the different kinds of Azure resources that you might choose to create. They're classified in different ways. Okay, you can just find one here, or you can search for it up here. And then once you pick something here that you're interested in, let's say I might want to run some Azure functions. So I'll select that, and it should add it here. Actually, I accidentally clicked it twice, so I'll take it out once here. And then for each type of resource, it knows how to price that resource. So it knows things like what region is this available in, or what regions are this available in. I like to put it in East US if I can. It tells me here the first 4,000 gigabytes of execution and are free. That's great. And then, then it knows what parameters there are that are going to be factored into the formula for figuring out how much this actually costs. And I chose a bad example here because these are so free. I have to put a really big number in there to make it look like it costs something. Let's try something else. I had another. Here we go. You're saving. I had another estimate here, which I guess I didn't save. Okay, so I can go through this list of products and I can select things. And then I can go down here, and for each item that I selected, I can, again, select what region I want it in. This is a good way to find out if some Azure resources are not available in the region that you want, because for performance reasons and so on, you're going to want to put all your resources in the same region if you can. It's cheaper and works better. And then other choices you have. This is for a virtual machine, so I get to pick whether I want Windows or Linux. I get to pick, there's some other preset types here. All right, and then this gives you the different pricing levels for virtual machines, and there's dozens upon dozens upon dozens of them, maybe hundreds of them. Some of them are extremely expensive, like this one. Well, let's try G. All right, G, I was told, any pricing tier that starts with a G, the G stands for Godzilla. I got that directly from Scott Guthrie. Scott Goo said that. Let's see. Oh, looks like that was such a good joke they took them out. I don't see any G's anymore.
And hey, Richard, just a time check.
Yep.
We're at 2:32, so we might want to run.
How much time is left? How much time is left?
Yeah. So I think we were trying to end at 1:45. So.
Okay. Well, we need to hurry. Okay. So here I get to pick, and then it'll tell me here's how much that pricing tier, one virtual machine running 730 hours. That's how many hours there are in a month. $950 a month. Okay, I can save this list and bring it up again and tweak it as I'm planning what I want to put together in my deployment. Okay, there also are a couple of new APIs that have been put out. These are fairly new. Okay. Usage API and rate card API. With those APIs, you can retrieve the same, information about your actual usage from Azure, and you can compare that with hypotheticals using these prices based on your subscription plan. So with a little bit of programming, if you want to go to the trouble, you can do fairly sophisticated little queries here in terms of saying, what if I have a bunch of virtual machines and I want to switch them over to platform services instead? Let's have a farm of virtual machines running web servers and I want to change those to web apps. What would that cost me? That's based on and you can feed the consumption that you're currently having into that. Okay, let's look real quick at how you can look at your bill and how you can find out what you're spending your money on. So here's the subscription. If I go down to here, here's usage and quotas. Actually, that's probably not what I want to look at. It is not what I want to look at. There we go. Invoices. Okay, so I can download any of my Azure invoices here, and then cost analysis, which will give me pretty much the same information, but as a live query. Notice that I can supply tags in here as parameters to this query, and I can also select individual resource groups. So again, if I just want to know what this particular resource group contributed to my overall bill, or these two did, I can just filter on that. Okay, and again, this API that I was showing you can fetch the same information for you programmatically. Okay, so once we know how to gauge what we're currently spending and where we're spending it, we then want to look at, do I need to do anything proactively in order to limit how much costs I'm going to incur? Okay, now, if I'm the only one who's creating resources in Azure, and I'm the administrator, and I'm the bill payer, and I'm the developer, and I'm the QA tester, and I'm doing everything, I'm mowing the grass and taking out the trash too, then I don't really care about restricting the permissions I have to do my things, because I just want to do everything. But if I'm leading a team, or if I'm a manager and I don't even do geek stuff at all, I'm just paying bills, then I might want to put restrictions on what individual people on my team are allowed to do. And in particular, I might want to say that you can go in and you can create things, but only in certain places. The usual way this would be to, if you admit a user as a member of a subscription, then they're only allowed to deal with resources. They can't do anything with any resources except the ones that belong to that subscription. Within the subscription, you can limit their access to individual resource groups. And that's one of the big advantages of resource groups. So I could have dev resource groups and let developers give them full ownership rights to those resource groups, but no ownership rights to the QA resource groups. I can create resource groups for QA or for production. The production resource group could be in the same subscription, but only high-level administrative people get to have permission to put resources into the production resource group. You can normally you need some sort of a user identity or user account. If you have Office 365, then you're just going to use almost certainly going to use your Active Directory, your Azure Active Directory that you have available in Office 365, and you'll probably do it that way whether or not you federate Azure Active Directory with your on-prem Windows or whatever other directory service you have. Okay, so that's role-based access control, and it simply says if I allow you to join a resource group and I make you a contributor, that means you can create assets in there of any sort. I do not, by making you a contributor, you can put any kind of a resource you want in the resource group, but only in that resource group. If I make you an owner, you can do that, plus you can add other users to the group. I probably don't want to make you an owner unless you really are an administrator. If I'm an administrator, I might prefer to just retain to myself the ability to decide who gets to be a contributor to my group. And finally, readers get to see what's in the resource group, but they don't get to change anything. Okay, now we're going to talk about Azure policies. So the Azure Resource Group idea, or the role-based access control idea, is simply saying, I'm not going to limit what you can do, but I'm going to limit where you can do it. And I'm going to make sure that when you do it, I know who it was. I know it was you who did it. Okay, so if I see a big spike on my bill and your name, it came from a resource group that you have ownership to, I know you're one of the people I'm going to talk to about it. Azure policies actually give you a way of saying, I don't want anybody being able to create certain kinds of resources. Or I don't want anybody being able to create a resource that costs more than a certain amount. You can also say, I'll let you create it, but I want to keep extra close tabs on it. And that's called an auditing policy. So you can put in restrictions like the examples that I'm showing here. You can say that certain resources can be created, but they can only be created in certain regions. Like say only within the United States, or only within Western Hemisphere, or only within Europe. Or you can say certain naming conventions have to be followed. You can also say certain tagging conventions have to be followed. And then supported SKUs, that's a huge one. That means you can't put anything in there unless it's one of these kinds of SKUs. All right, this looks sort of similar. Let me give you a quick example of that. So here's my subscription again. I go back in there and go down to the policies tab right here. Okay, you can see that I've already created a policy. The policy says apply the tag and its default value to resource groups. Okay, so I'm saying that in the black box resource group, that's the scope of this rule. I want to, where do I say it here? Oh, and it doesn't comply with the rule either. I'll create another one. This one's a little messy. I'll create a new one. I click here where it says assign policy, pick the subscription I want, pick and I can limit this policy. I can make this policy apply to my entire subscription, or I can limit it to a resource group within the subscription. All right, so that's the scope of the policy. Then, what policy do I want? And I get a list. Let's go I want the restricted SKU one. This is an interesting one. It requires SQL Server version 12. Yell anybody if you see the one I'm looking for. I want to limit the size of virtual machines. Here we go. Allowed resource types. Right here. Allowed resource types. Select. All right. And what are we going to allow? This is the payload comes down here at the end. What kinds of resource am I going to allow this resource group to contain? Well, I think it's just fine if you want to put in there a, what? Let's find something that makes sense in English. Oh, virtual machines. There we go. You can put virtual machines in there. You can put dev test labs in there. All right. We'll let you do that. Now, again, I think this policy won't be complied with because I've already, oh, here it is. Okay. I can also, I won't bother drilling through the list because we're running short of time, but I could have also picked one that would have limited the SKU, the SKU, meaning that, again, if I only want to allow virtual machines that are up to but not greater than a certain pricing level, then I can specify all the pricing levels that I said are okay, and you can create those and you can't create any others. Now again, I'm just showing you this at the scope of a resource group, but you could apply the same kind of policies to an entire subscription if you wanted. Okay. And I'm sorry, I'm gonna just breeze on ahead. Here's one other thing that you can do. there's a special kind of an Azure policy called a resource lock. These are really only meant to be used in production. These are for situations where I want my, my virtual machine, my SQL database, my whatever I have. It's in production. Maybe it's in a subscription that's dedicated to production. Maybe it's in a resource group, but whatever. I don't want anybody ever deleting this resource. Just never let it happen. I can put this, and I have to be a very high-ranking account administrator to set this policy. But I can say this, any resource that I tag with this policy cannot be deleted. An even more extreme step I can take is to say that I want it to be read-only, which means that no one can make any modification to that resource once it's been deployed. Again, there will be exceptions for high-ranking administrative type people or DevOps type people so that they can actually deploy things. But as a general rule, I don't want anyone, even if they've got full ownership of rights within the subscription, to modify that resource. There's a note in the balloon there that says sometimes things that don't seem to need to write to the resource actually do need to write to the resource, so you have to be a little careful about it. Okay, so it's 2:44, and I'm going to open this up. I'm going to let Mark take the meeting back, and I'm going to let him open it up for questions, comments, and close it. Is that okay, Mark?
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks so much, Richard. That was really great. What
I'm going to stop sharing.
Yep.
Go ahead.
And I'm having a small Skype problem. I don't think I can do a screen share right now, but what questions do you guys have?
Let me go ahead and share my screen then.
Yep. So I'm not sure if you have my last slide here, Richard, on the call to action.
I don't know, do I? You know what, I don't.
let me send it to you here. What questions do you folks have? All right. So that means that Richard spoke adequately to all of your questions. That's the way I'll take it. So Richard, when that comes through, if you don't mind sharing that.
Well, I heard something go bang in the background.
Yeah. So again, first of all, thank you guys for hanging with us through a couple of the technical issues, at least on my side. So hopefully you benefited from this and gained some insights, and we're able to develop a strong Azure governance plan, because that's, at the end of the day, that's what we want for you. We want you to have a plan so that you guys are able to control those costs and maximize your value and investment in Azure. So again, we want to bring this all back to the big picture. How do you control costs in Azure and maximize your value? So here's a call to action that I'll begin, and then by the time, there it is. So first of all, identify your organization's governance weakness. It's very important that you know yourself, you know where you're strong, where you're not, so that you can build a plan for where you need to be. And in that, develop a clear governance plan that works for your organization. So get the big picture, map things out, whiteboard what your structure is, what you should be, what you want it to be. And then define who you want to have what access, and ultimately control your spend down to the nitty-gritty detail. Know what you're spending and why. So provide reporting to your billing, your executive team, so they can see what you're spending and you can justify it and continue to spend in Azure. And then very important, to save you guys time and make it easier, automate your governance process. There are a lot of great tools that you can do that. And then always look for ways to improve. You have to keep up a monitoring and checking in of your governance plan, because people leave the organization, roles change. Nothing remains static, even in small businesses. So make sure you're still checking in however often you think is appropriate. And then, as you can tell, you need to work with some kind of experienced Azure partner wherever you need help. It might be at a very high level, it might be granular, but I think it's really important to work with a partner. So, and then Richard, if you could go to the overview slide real briefly. So, that last point, by the way, is where we come in. If please do let us know if you're interested in a demo or a whiteboarding session. We'd be happy to get more more siloed with you as a customer. We have deep experience in building out partial or full governance plans, and would love the opportunity to help you. So as you may know, we have a broad solution offerings portfolio that covers everything from O365 to app dev to SharePoint to business intelligence, and obviously Azure Infrastructure as a Service, Platform as a Service. That's a sweet spot for us. So engage us in at least a conversation. If you guys have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out via email, call. That's what we're here for. So again, thank you guys so much for your time. Have an awesome weekend, and we'll see you next time on Demystifying the Microsoft Cloud webinar. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.